Hi, everybody. I'm Tommy.
And I'm Dante.
And you're listening to Twigging Onto Twig, a podcast in which we talk about Wildbow's most Dickinsonian web serial, Twig.
Dickinsonian, eh? We're changing up the word every week now?
Whenever something new springs to mind, I think.
Okay. Works for me.
Spring to mind does not count as our plant pun for the episode, I think.
Well, you can come up with another one then.
Right.
In today's episode, we're talking about Taking Root 1.3 and 1.4.
So first, we're going to go over the story, the summary of the chapters here. But I just wanted to note, before we get into that, it's pretty interesting that we go from, at the end of 1.2, this wham line about expiration dates, something really dramatic and important, to, a week later?
Mm-hmm. And we don't get any mention of expiration dates at all in either of these two chapters.
Nope. Sai doesn't mention it to the rest of his cohort, doesn't bring it up at all. So it's interesting there.
I don't know if that means it's not as important as we thought it was, or
it's there to make us worry and wonder about it, keep us a little anxious when we go into this mystery. You know, we have a mystery of our own, that Sai has a mystery of his own that's in addition to the dangerous one that they're investigating. So, chapter 1.3 of Taking Root, a week has passed. Sai is sitting in the Academy Hospital, the Hedge, and has barricaded himself in an office by blocking the door with a heavy bookcase. Hale, the person running his project, shows up and he mentions that the Lambsbridge gang needs Sai, and Sai disassembles the door and goes with him. Hale outlines the mission. 3 students at a school called Mothmont, which feeds the academy, have murdered their parents and then themselves. And the Lambsbridge gang needs to figure out what's going on and be quiet about it and quick about it, because Mothmont's families are VIPs, very prestigious people, and they are the future of the... Yes, correct. I did not want to repeat to VIP, very important people. People know what VIP means.
Well, they do now.
Yep, there we go. And after Sai and Hale talk, Sai has a conversation with Hale's underling, one of the people who is assigned to the Sai and his gang's project, Lacey. Sai and Lacey tries to get along with Sai, and Sai is having none of it. And he definitely goes out of his way to make her feel very uncomfortable. Once he gets to the school, he gets situated, and we find out that it's a dangerous place. People have already tried to secretly murder the Lambsbridge orphans. Sai theorizes then that the child assassins are actually tools rather than the instigators of the assassins themselves.
Mm-hmm. Then we get into chapter 1.4. The Lambsbridge gang go over their cover identities and some of the work they've done so far. Sai's cover is to be a less than respectable acquaintance of theirs, knowing that this won't go over well.
Being a toffee school and all that.
Mm-hmm. Sai makes a play to try and shake things up. When he's introduced to Gordon's classmate Ed, he is increasingly insulting to him, making him angry. And he also has Helen be overly affectionate to Sai to make Ed jealous. And Ed is just about to punch Sai's face in when a teacher breaks things up. Sai explains to his fellow Lambsbridge orphans that he has now gotten everyone's attention, and they'll be able to look for people who are overly interested, as they might be involved in the murder mystery. Also, Sai and Jamie have this cute little shoving match. There's a time skip, and then Sai and Ed meet after class to fight. Sai loses badly, but he sees 3 boys in a window who he believes to be suspects. Sai also suspects a girl is involved because some of the murder attempts have involved poison.
Before we get into the rest of that, I just wanted to talk a little bit about that fight. I really enjoyed the line. Let me find the exact line, but it made me laugh a little bit. Was it... To his credit, Ed didn't know how to throw a punch. He knew how to throw 10. And to my credit, I managed to stay on my feet until the 10th punch. So, I got a kick out of that as a statement. Nothing really big or important there. Just it was a good way with words.
Sai is hilarious.
Yeah, he's got a good way with words. Yeah.
I really liked when he was first instigating things with Ed, and Jamie was like, "What was that all about?" And here, let me pull up the thing.
Are you going to talk about the? I didn't say I wanted to not be at the bottom of the pecking order. That's the one. Yeah. It's like I didn't say I was going to win because Sai clearly does not win.
I'm establishing the pecking order. And Gordon says, in all the years I've known you, from the very beginning, I've never, ever known you to win a fight or even put in a good showing. I didn't say I'd be at the top of the pecking order. I protested.
Yeah, it's
great.
It is. And it's interesting also because I feel like it's a very different tone of character than both Taylor or Blake, who Wildbow have written beforehand. It's a much more, I think you said you didn't necessarily like that, or I didn't like the word whimsical, but Sai, has a certain level of whimsy in how he thinks and talks.
Absolutely.
Whereas Taylor...
I think we're getting ahead of ourselves here.
A little bit. You are. Yeah, I am. Not you. Me. We are. So let's get back on track here.
Yeah, we're still in the plot section.
Yeah. So before we move on to our more general segments on world building and characters and whatnot, I do want to talk about the plot that is being investigated here.
Mm-hmm. Yes. The plot right now is a plot.
A plot to murder important people, who's via their children. So I have a number of suppositions and thoughts about that. But first, I just want to say this really, really reminded me of this. Admittedly, I don't remember it very well, but pretty mediocre YA spy novel. One of those Alex Rider novels by Anthony Horowitz, Point Blanc, where the villain is the headmaster of a school who clones himself and uses plastic surgery to alter the clones to replace the students at this prestigious Alpine school, and then uses them to murder their parents in like a similar way of, total destruction of the family, blow up the house, etc., etc. I do also remember a ski chase down a mountain with snowmobiles and an avalanche, but I'm pretty sure we're not going to get that in Twig.
I mean, you never know. I've never heard of this novel.
Yeah, I remember it being pretty mediocre, but it just rang a bell, though, the plot there.
Sure. Also, spoilers.
For a mediocre novel, at least 15 years old. Yep.
Exactly.
Spoilers.
All right. So go on with your many suppositions.
So, I guess we get from Sai, we know that he thinks that this is that the students or the children are being used are tools. They're not the instigators of the assassination attempts themselves. They're presumably brainwashed, and I'm pointing that out specifically because we know that is generally speaking what the Lambsbridge orphans projects are. They're brain things. They're related to the department that does this kind of mental, presumably mental conditioning or brain surgery or we don't really know yet what Hale's projects are, but he mentioned its brains. So it's interesting that this first real plot that we're getting in the novel is something clearly related.
Yeah, it certainly seems that way.
Yeah. So I guess that's the main supposition that I've got there, is that there's a connection that we're going to find out between.
Do you think that that there's an actual connection between the plot and Hale's project, or do you think it's just a thematic connection?
I thought mostly a thematic one, but I am not certain, because we do know that the Mothmont school feeds the academy. So it definitely makes sense that there's a connection. Maybe it's someone that has formerly worked with Hale who's, trying to set up. But then again, these children are being used to attack not the academy itself, but the movers and shakers. So in theory, I could see this being the academy, because they're the ones that
Mhm.
we see having the kind of resources to pull something big like this off, trying to cut down people who maybe are working against the academy.
Yeah.
That's
Well, they did say that they had suspected a connection with the academy because the Mithmont students go
yeah,
to Radham, I think they said weekly, but they had looked into a possible connection and not found anything.
that is true. I'm sure we'll get more about that, but just before we really learn much, it's interesting to have thoughts about it. I mean, where are you? What are you thinking about where we're going with this plot and with this?
Well, my problem is I remember what happens, so
Fair enough.
I don't want to speculate for fear of being influenced by knowledge.
Yeah, I guess it's a little fresher for me because I remember my speculations at the time.
Sure.
So, yeah, fair enough. So on the subject of the investigation itself, I kind of thought it interesting and maybe problematic's the wrong word, but less clever than makes sense. That as soon as Sai shows up, all of the Lambsbridge orphans gather and talk in the middle of the thing where everybody can see them.
Right.
So everybody now knows that Sai is related to that group.
Right. Didn't they specifically call that out though?
Yes, they did. But it still seemed like Sai could probably have gathered some information if he showed up and investigated first. But I get,
Yeah.
we'll talk about that a little bit, I think, when we got about to Sai and his convoluted plans.
Right.
But yeah.
I don't know. Maybe he could have gotten more information going in separately. But
'Cause I mean-
this team, I think, seems to work much more effectively as a unit than as individuals. So probably, I personally think that getting together and touching base probably is better for the investigation.
Yeah, you're probably right. I mean, and they call it out explicitly in the text that the Lambsbridge orphans are meant to operate as a unit.
Exactly.
So yeah, I guess you're right. Absolutely.
Mhm.
And the other thing that I wanted to call out is the fact that, well, someone has tried to murder all of the different orphans at some point during the past week, and that the one that was most successful and is called out is Poison, and that they realize that one of the suspects, despite seeing only 3 boys, one of the suspects is a girl because Poison is a woman's weapon, which, as you said, Game of Thrones says specifically. It's a line from there, but I know that statistically it's a real thing that it's more likely for a woman to use a poison, but I would have kind of assumed that in this kind of world where biotech and whatnot is so prevalent, that kind of difference would negate, would negate just because of the prevalence of horrible, dangerous poisons.
Yeah, maybe. I think I agree with you. I would expect poison or other like biological weapons would be far more prevalent among both genders or among all genders than they are IRL.
Yeah.
Maybe it is more common in this setting, but it's just proportionally more common. So instead of like
you have the statistics here.
I have the statistics here. So in real life, women use poison. 4% of killings by women are poison. 1% of killings by men are poison. So perhaps it would be like, 15% are poison by women and 12% are poison by men or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I can buy that. I can definitely buy that.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like this is one of those things where it's just like, it just is a thing and there probably isn't a whole lot of lore behind it, but
yeah, I can buy that.
But we can speculate.
I mean, that's why we're here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, I don't have much else to say about the investigation yet. We don't know much. We know that there are 4 suspects. I am going to assume that they are students that have been brainwashed while maybe in the academy or in the school,
okay,
and being pointed out to the academy. Despite what I said about it reminding me about the villain cloning himself and whatnot, it seems far more likely for it to be brainwashing and mental conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess we'll
Yeah,
see.
I agree. I do think that it's a really fun premise for an investigation.
Oh, for sure.
And for like a murder mystery, because like everyone likes a good murder mystery, but this one, like it's got all the right things, the intrigue and the high stakes, and but also like just the
It's
right amount of creepy otherworld
kids
humor, horror.
and
Uh,
creepy kids.
yes, so I find it
Yeah,
very exciting and entertaining.
I do too. And I mean, this setting is kind of why I changed. You called it out at the beginning, to Dickinsonian, because it feels very much like that tone of like the smarmy rich kids, and then like the orphanage, and the social class and the social dichotomies here.
Hmm.
Um, oh yeah. So yeah, not much more to say, I think, for me at least, about the investigation.
Yeah. So on the subject of things being Dickinsonian, let's move on to our world building section.
Sure. So I called out two things in our notes here, just in terms of general tropes and things. The first is comes up pretty much at the beginning of the chapter, where the syringes that are in the room that Sai has barricaded into are clearly far more ornate than they need to be.
Hmm. I
And
found they reminded me of a syringe that some of our audience may remember showing up
I did
in
too,
another work by Wildbow.
with a face floating around in it.
Yep.
Yep, I definitely had that same thought, especially the way the glass was described as slightly cloudy, which I know is a thing that happens with old glass, historic, not, well, I say pre-modern, but that's not the right word because that's an actual thing. But glass
Sure.
that
I
is
know what you
not
mean.
post, industrial, so when there's still some irregularities in the glass making project or process.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, again, there's this emphasis that we called out last episode on beauty. Though in this case, it's not necessarily form over function or beauty over function, but it's still a choice to make something prettier than it has to be,
Hmm.
which I think is interesting in contrast to, as we talked about again last episode, Mrs. I want to say Mrs. Thetford. I can't
Yep.
remember her name. Yeah, Mrs. Thetford's beast creature.
Which was uglier than it needed to be.
Exactly. Yeah. And the other thing that I wanted to call out generally is that when Sai goes to the Mothmont, he sees Lillian talking to a girl and, quote, a taller, skinny, buck-toothed man who looked to be about 15. And this is important because using the word man at the age of 15, but the girl presumably similar age, is still a girl. And the age at which society decides that adulthood is pretty important. We would very rarely in our society call a 15-year-old a man unless we're trying to say
Yep.
something specific about this person.
Absolutely.
It's so often called out in like police reports that when they're trying to justify having done something awful to a kid, they'll describe the kid as a man, rather than a child.
Okay.
So just that in this society, a 15-year-old, well, maybe it's just Psy, but Psy is a product of a society.
Mhm.
So it's important to note that, I think it's important to note that, yeah, this person who is still in school, this boy who's 15, is a man.
Yeah, that's interesting. I feel like that, I mean, I don't know for sure, but I feel like that sounds like something that would have been normal, 100 years ago.
Potentially. But
So maybe this is like, a 20s thing or even a Dickinsonian thing, going back to that word again. I feel like that is an old-fashioned way of looking at things, and this is an old-fashioned setting, so it might just be a bit of reminding us of that aspect of the setting.
Sure. But even if that's the case, though, it still sets up expectations of the setting itself.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And
Not
I just
disagreeing with you, just
no, I get that. Yeah.
as to why.
Yeah. And I thought it was interesting that, yeah, the girl who is presumably a peer of her and Lillian, or of him and Lillian, was still just a girl.
Mhm.
And I don't know if that's some level of internalized, I mean, that's a lot to say misogyny necessarily, but
Yeah, very possibly.
yeah, just saying, not recognizing. I don't know. I'm sure we'll get a bit more of that later on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's something to keep an eye on if we get more hints about these sort of societal values.
Yeah, that's a good way. Yeah, good word. Values. I hadn't thought of it, but yeah. So we get a few other places. We get more about the Academy. We talked about the Academy last episode, but we get a lot more about it. Last episode, the Academy existed purely as this looming presence over the city that they're traveling around in. And here we get sort of an anatomical breakdown of the Academy.
Mm-hmm. Or at least certain insights as to various parts of the Academy and the way it works.
For sure. So the first
most
part...
notably, starting with the hedge, because that's where the action starts in these chapters. Which is a fun place because it's built right into the wall between Radham Academy and Radham Town.
Yeah,
and it mentions that the students buy experience from it, and the town buys care.
Can I just note how messed up it is that presumably these are all students that have paid admission fees and whatnot, and then they have to, in addition to that, buy the ability to do the work they do. But I guess, I'm saying that out loud, and, we've
that
both
totally
been to university.
Jives with my experience in university.
Yep, exactly. Paying however many hundreds for textbooks and... Yep. No, yeah, as I was saying it, it's like, wait a second there. Yep, this is accurate. And I thought it was interesting then calling it a hedge, because a hedge is a barrier. It's a wall. Mm-hmm. But it's also, in theory and in appearance, while still being very much a hard barrier, something that is very difficult to cross, it's in theory much more permeable than a wall is. It's creating this idea of the Academy being a part of the town, and the town, it's, that the two are symbiotic rather than one exploiting the other.
Okay.
Just because, as a hedge, it's got space through it. It's got room. You could, push your way through a hedge if you need to.
I wonder if it's called the hedge because of all the plants that are shoring it up so that it looks like it's made of hedge.
Yeah, I can see that too. That's a good poll. I hadn't really made... I guess I haven't really internalized it yet, the aesthetic of the plants growing everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
I also wanted to point out this historical thing about hedges, in that they are, well, if I remember correctly, and I'm sure someone out there has far more knowledge of early modern British history, but the hedges were explicitly one of the methods that were used and called out in the Enclosures Act, enclosing the commons, which is one of the predecessors or initial statement or initial things that sort of bring us to the stage of capitalism where we are now, where the common use lands, if it was quote unquote considered wasteland, could just be claimed by landlords and closed off and then sold or exploited rather than being common use land. So I just wanted to point that out specifically because, as we talked in the opening episode, a biopunk setting, one of the things that generally has is these oppressive power structures. And, the Academy being closed off, and, they said last episode that it was once built in a field and is sort of explicitly separating this area from this what was once a commons area to separating it from the town and like the actual common folk.
See, you saying this, I think it's really interesting that those are both kind of like the opposite of each other. Because on the one hand, you're holding up like, oh, it's a hedge, which is permeable, and it means that there's like the ability to go back and forth through it. Well, but then all of a sudden, like, it's a hedge, and therefore it's like cutting them off from each other. So there's a bit of a...
well, what I'm saying about the hedge serving as a barrier is that I think people envision a hedge as easier to cross than it actually is. Like the appearance of a hedge is softer than the appearance of a wall while still serving as a wall.
That's true.
So just a couple thoughts there.
Mm-hmm. I liked some of the other buildings that they mentioned. They talk about the tower where Hale has his offices.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone likes a good tower. Maybe
Absolutely.
I kind of think like when you think of towers in academia, or at least in fictional fantasy academia.
It's the Ivory Tower, right?
It's the Ivory Tower, but also could be the Wizard's Tower.
Absolutely. That makes sense.
Yeah. Wizards being well known for associated with intelligence, the brain. This tower is where the brain stuff is. Maybe I'm just like grasping at straws to get a connection here, but
I don't think so necessarily.
yeah,
I can see that, and yeah, I mean, also the brain is in the head, which is above everything else, which is a tower.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was interesting that they talk about how this brain department is kind of considered a dead end.
Yes, that is super fascinating.
Because like I can sort of see that tying into, I think we talked about it, about like, doing stuff in the brain is subtle. It's not these big visually impressive projects. It's not like horrible rabbit fetuses walking around the streets or all that. It's something that it's very hard to point to successes or failures unless, something is dead.
Yes.
And I did also want to note that I thought it made sense and it was kind of interesting that, they decided to use the brain section as their archives, the information storage and data things. It's just like, yeah, the brain stores stuff.
Makes sense.
Absolutely. You had something. Yeah. You had some other stuff you wanted to talk about, I think, about the tower?
No, mostly just building on what you were saying about how it's a dead end and how, really when I sort of think or especially when you think of like other biopunk stuff that I've seen recently, a lot of it, like the brain, is the cutting edge. I mean, I think that there's very good reason for that because the brain is kind of like the most important part of the body. But like most of the time you think of like, the people who study the brain, they're like on top. They're the most going on. But then here it's a dead end, and here it's completely the reverse. And I just think that's so fun.
No, I definitely agree. Yeah, it's a very interesting dichotomy, I guess, or just an interesting world building statement on like the priorities in the world.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah. And the other place that they mentioned in the academy is Claret Hall.
Yes, I thought that was such a really interesting name for a place.
Yeah, because a claret is a red wine, right? I am not super familiar with wine. What wine's what?
Yeah, so claret is wine. It's red wine. But also you can use the word claret as a color, the color of red wine, a sort of purplish red.
Mm-hmm. Like a deep red.
Deep red, which is the color that we've seen of the leaves, like one of the colors of the academy, which is silver and red.
Mm-hmm.
But also in some places, claret is a slang term for blood.
Oh,
which
really?
Is also the same color as wine. So there's that connection there too.
It's interesting. And if I remember correctly, I didn't write this down in my notes, and it's been a bit since I've read the chapter. By a bit, I mean, a few hours since I read it. But I don't remember. They mentioned Claret Hall being the heart, right? Like if the tower's the brain, the hall was the heart. And
yes, definitely it's like the student center.
Yeah, which is then, it's interesting then to explicitly tie it to blood in the heart.
Yeah, it doesn't explicitly say the heart, but I'm pretty sure that's what we're all thinking reading it. So
then maybe, I made a supposition there or reading too much into it.
I also thought,
go ahead.
Like, there is a Saint Anthony Mary Claret.
Okay.
Who founded an order of, I think it was like an order of priests or an order of monks. Anyway, so if you had some of these older church-run academic institutions, you would very likely have a claret hall there. It has that sort of old academic feel to it because of that.
Yeah.
So I just thought it was such a clever name.
That is. I did not know that last bit at all.
Putting all those things all just dropping into a single word, and it just is so great.
No, yeah, definitely. That adds a lot to it actually, because it is so much of. Well, that's actually really interesting because so many. Well, obviously, we know that this academy is a relatively recent institution, whereas you're talking about these old academic centers would have a claret hall in theory. Um, so this academy again,
Do
we're
we know
getting.
that it's recent? Because
Yeah.
they mention that what things were at Radham before the academy showed up, but I don't remember them saying that happened relatively recently.
I thought maybe I read too much into it, but I thought it was saying that the academy was, a product of this biotech world, not
Well, yes, but it also says
which is
that this
a
biotech
hundred years
world
old,
is 100 years old.
which is very
So,
young in terms of like old universities.
sure.
Like, so what I was getting at, I guess, is that I can see, because since we've already talked about how much this world seems to care about the image of things, them calling this hall something that an old university would have to sort of claim that prestige.
Sure.
I don't know.
Yes.
Maybe
Well,
I'm stretching
I
there.
kind of think that, like, when I said an old university, like, I don't mean like 500 years old.
See,
Like,
I was picturing the Oxfords and Cambridges and
yeah, like, to me, I'm thinking like a university founded in the 1800s.
okay,
So I'm like, yeah, this is definitely something that Radham is
this tracks.
in line with. This tracks for me. So,
Sure.
like, yeah, maybe if it was like a super ancient institution like Oxford, then maybe that would be something too. But let me look up.
I guess part of why my mind went to Oxford is because of the Golden Compass and that kind of like.
Definitely a good call there. Yeah, like Saint Anthony Mary Claret died in 1870.
Oh, really? Okay, so he's a recent saint.
You wouldn't have like a 500-year-old academy named after him, but you would have something that was
in 1920,
like a hall that was built in the 20s in a respectable institution of higher learning. You would definitely see something with that sort of name tacked onto it.
What did he do, the saint?
He was an archbishop. He was Spanish.
Okay.
He was the confessor of Isabella II of Spain.
And what were the... Oh, go ahead.
And he founded a congregation of missionaries.
Okay.
They are...
What were his miracles to have him be canonized?
Oh, I don't know.
Okay. Fair enough.
That's usually not very important.
I don't know. It's, as someone who's, not a Catholic and not practicing, it's the stuff that sounds interesting to me. But all right. So you also wanted to talk about, I see in the notes, the symbology of the academy.
Yes, or at least to bring it up. They mentioned that the symbol is a helmet.
Surrounded by leaves, right?
Yes. Well, the leaves kind of make sense.
I really picture it as like a crown of laurels.
Yeah, me too. Like a surrounding of leaves is pretty normal in like heraldic badges or emblems like that.
Yeah.
And given what we've seen of this place being, shored up by plants and having plants everywhere, like absolutely leaves surrounding it totally makes sense. Like it would be weird if there weren't leaves.
I kind of wonder whether these plants and these vines are a product of this academy or if they're just like endemic in the world. Like every academy in every city has it. Because if
that's an interesting thought.
If they're emphasizing it on their coat of arms, then maybe it's a them thing.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder. Yeah, I'm sure we'll find out at some point.
Possibly, yeah.
Like what the rest of the world looks like, at least.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, while we're talking, I guess, about the academy and the symbols, it's interesting that the rank is shown, like everybody's wearing the same clothes more or less, but that the color demonstrates rank. It's sort of a Star Trek thing here.
Yep.
But yeah, and I've read somewhere that doctors' coats tend to be white, so that one can see when they're dirty / covered in blood / need to be changed and washed.
Yes.
Historically, so maybe using these different colors to show different ranks kind of gives us, who's going to be doing the real work and who's not, at least in their mentality, because I'm pretty sure the doctors at the top are not doing much work. They're delegating to their apprentices and grad students. And
possibly. Although you mentioned that doctors wearing white coats so that it's easy to see when they're dirty. I think in one of the previous chapters, we saw Hale wearing a black lab coat, and Cy mentions that it's black specifically so that it still looks good when it is dirty.
That's true. I missed that connection.
So yeah, maybe it's like, the important people are wearing black so that they can get dirty and get away with it, but the people who are still learning, they have to
they have to put on appearances far more than the tenured professors.
Yeah, or something along that lines. But going from there to just like a color-coded hierarchy, like I can absolutely see that. That sounds like the sort of thing you would see in an institution.
Absolutely, just sort of institutionalized, structure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the only other place that we really visit here is the school, Mothmont.
Mothmont, which sounds like a really pretty place. Like
it did.
It's got like the pale walls and the windows, like the way it describes the windows being made of like
shards of glass,
a mesh of branches with shards of glass embedding in them. The yard has this big glass roof held up by trees.
Yeah.
It really just sounds so beautiful.
Yeah, it made me think of like stained glass windows. And actually that middle section with the, it's the square in the middle of the school with the glass roof reminded me of Parliament here, where the MPs meet was once an outside square that is now roofed in, and it's really cool. And I kind of had that vibe of this, like, this square building was once open to the sky, but now because it's raining all the time, we've set up this thing where the trees hold up the glass so that the students can be outside without getting soaked.
Mm-hmm.
So Mothmont.
Also,
go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to mention the word Mothmont. So like Radham, Mothmont is not a real word. There's no place called Mothmont. There's no person named Mothmont. It's just another fictional word, which it sounds like a respectable sort of place word.
An institution
or a location, or a person, a respectable scientist sort of person who would have an institution named after them.
And just dissecting the word itself too, is this a school? And obviously a moth is an insect that spins itself a cocoon and emerges as a new thing. I'm sure I am digging deeper into these meanings of words and places than I really need to, but
maybe there's just a lot of moths around.
Potentially. They raised a mountain of moths to build this school.
Yes.
But no, I'm with you. I'm sure this was, a rich patron, Sir Lord Mothmont, patronizing the school and building it to But I do also want to note, or maybe you noted this, but I definitely also noticed it while we were reading, just how clean the place is comparatively.
Mm-hmm.
Enough that Cy calls out that it's clean.
Yes. Cy doesn't like clean institutions.
No. Which I think I get. Like, I definitely want my hospitals to be clean, but I get the feeling that it, like, especially coming from Cy, who is an experiment, a project, it probably has associations, the sterile environment that, aren't necessarily the same as ours.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And like, as you said, the pale walls also make it sort of stand out in my mental image, because I don't know if it's just because I've missed some descriptions elsewhere, but it feels like it's very different than the rest of the town and everything around it, which I still picture as like dark stone and like.
Is this school in Ratham?
I have no idea, actually. I assumed it was.
I assumed it wasn't. So
okay.
I don't think we know.
So I kind of assumed it was like downtown because there is no outdoor area. Like it's just the internal courtyard.
Mhm.
But I really don't know. Yeah, I don't know. That's
Interesting.
that's a good point. Yeah, I'm sure we'll find out. But yeah, yeah. So do you have anything else you want to say about world building and like location and whatnot in these chapters?
I think let's just carry on from here.
Okay.
The next section is our monster corner, or would be, but we don't really see any monsters here unless you count the Lambsbridge kids and the child assassins.
But we haven't met them yet.
We haven't met them yet.
And clearly, Sai, the snakes and spiders that were in the tanks that Sai released.
Snakes and spiders aren't monsters. They're cute.
I mean, I'm pretty sure that they were experimented upon snakes and spiders.
Probably.
Maybe Sai is going to get, spiders' powers or snakes' powers from being bitten.
This is actually a Spider-Man story.
Yep. Into the Spider-Verse here.
Yes.
But yeah, I also wanted to note that when Sai does his big old escape project thing, or not escape, but knocking over the things, the first thought that people have is we thought something had escaped, which I'm sure is not foreshadowing anything. Yeah.
Sai has escaped. Or rather, Sai has
not escaped.
The opposite of escaped.
Yeah, and speaking of foreshadowing, I'm probably pushing a little bit, but when Sai's taunting Lacey, he mentions that like there's no way she caught all the spiders and snakes. So I would not be surprised if we see one of those showing up again at an inopportune moment or opportune moment.
Wasn't the implication that he had eaten them?
Whoa, what? I did not get that.
Yeah, because I don't remember exactly the quote, but I definitely thought that he was implying to Lacey that, like, oh, you didn't find all of them because I had a nice snack while I was in there.
I totally missed that. Wow. Wow, yeah, I'd like to find that. Maybe you can find that later on. I don't need to find that now, but I did not catch that at all.
How about food? You barely ate at all after you locked yourself in the office. I ate plenty, I said, meeting her eyes. You didn't find all the spiders that had been in the glass case, did you?
Okay, yeah, that's pretty explicit. I don't know how I missed that. Okay. Yeah, okay, Sai ate spiders.
Yep.
Cool. I guess whatever you need to do to survive,
I mean,
Sai.
65% chance he's just making this up.
Yes. But, I'm sure she's telling herself that too, but then Sai knows that, so he's setting, yeah, who knows? But yeah, like I missed that very much.
Oh yeah, I thought that was a fun thing that he was saying. So
yeah,
I definitely call that.
Definitely, yep.
So the next section we have is historical references.
Yep. So we get more of Mary Shelley here,
and by Mary Shelley we mean Wollstone, because as we remarked, Wollstone's name comes from Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, and I think it's interesting that we get this name come up again because Wollstone's papers were on the desk of the snake charmer.
Yeah, there's this kind of making Wollstone explicitly the foundational work of...
Or a foundational work, yeah.
Of this whole setting.
So I think that, like, last time it came up, I kind of assumed that it was just like a bit of set dressing. Like I assumed Wallace's law was a bit of set dressing, just a little bit of hints of a larger world here. But having it referenced again here, I kind of think that this Wollstone is going to end up being someone important, or at least their ratio theory is going to be important.
On the other hand, and as a counter to that, maybe Wollstone's ratios are only important to cats because the snake charmer was working on cat snakes, and here they say, keeping to Wollstone's wise ratio, we can discern which parts of the pattern apply to specific parts of the cat.
Maybe cats are just common examples. Because I'm pretty sure the idea, like they say, just for like any given organism. I'm pretty sure.
I know. I'm just because I just noticed that cat was called out, or this is came up in reference to the Wollstone twice now. Like I said, that's only true. As a pattern if it's 3 times.
Sai did say that.
Yep.
I
All
find
right.
it interesting that, like, trying to speculate about these ratios, like,
Mhm.
obviously, like, not being an expert on biology or anatomy or anything, but I do
Mhm.
know enough to know that, like, various ratios of hormones and chemicals and nutrients and whatever are all super important. And there's
Yeah.
a heck of a lot more than 9 of them. So I'm not sure what these 9 ratios are. He mentions, or she mentions, whoever it is, the teacher there,
Yeah.
mentions a wise ratio, but
And
doesn't say what that is.
we know that at least one of these ratios is used on like physical structure and size. So maybe it's sort of more general rules about
Mhm.
like for example, an an arthropod can only get so big until it can no longer support itself by the oxygen it absorbs. Or
Right.
so it might be something to do with that kind of rule of biology.
Well, so she mentions that the 9 ratios of Woolstone
Yeah,
are sort of built upon the golden ratio, which you might know is
I do not.
so the golden ratio is a number.
Oh,
It's
oh, yes, yes.
yes. So specifically, it's a number that has this sort of what's the
It's the
word?
spiral thing.
Yes, it's the spiral thing. It's got this sort of reputation of being like this mystical number that appears in like everything from nature to art, to architecture, or whatever.
Aliens.
Aliens, yes. Some of which is valid and most of which is nonsense.
Okay.
And there is some folklore about how like various proportions in the human body are related to this golden ratio.
Okay.
I'm trying to find one, but they're all super sketchy websites because this is a super sketchy theory. Yeah, like, the length of your hand compared to the length of your arm or
Okay.
other things like that. So I would kind of guess that that's sort of
So it's all
where this idea is coming from, or at least how the golden ratio would
relates.
fit into this setting in order to be built
Sure.
upon. But I mean, we really don't get enough information here to really
No,
dig into what exactly it means, and probably we won't because
it's not the point of
that's
this.
not the point of this, and the more physical details of how it works, the less freedom Wildbow has to take the story wherever he feels like it should go.
Yeah. Putting rules to it. It's like a horror movie. The more you see the monster, the less scary it is.
That's true.
Yeah.
That being said, I do kind of want to know all about these 9 ratios.
Oh, absolutely. Even just generally what they are. Like,
Yes.
I mean, even if it's only, knees, shoulders, heads, and toes type of thing, it's, yeah, I'd be curious.
Yeah.
And you called out something else in terms of historical references that I completely did not catch.
Oh, yeah, because I was reading it, and Ed and Cy call each other Bruno, and I was like, "What the heck is a Bruno?"
Because we definitely do not talk
That's not
about
an
it.
insult I'm familiar with, and it turns out that it's just like 1920s slang for a tough guy.
Do you know where that comes from? I'm just curious. I did not know that either, and I just kind of.
No, I don't know where it comes from. I mean, Bruno is a name, and it refers
You're better
to...
than I because I just assumed that was Wildbow making something up, and you went and researched it. So, kudos.
Well, I'll be honest. I called it out in my live read and was told that it was slang, and then I looked it up and saw sites saying yes, it's slang, but I didn't see anything about where it came from or what it referred to.
Okay, so and it just means a tough guy, like a. Okay.
Yeah, so it looks like it's a reference to somebody or something, but it's just a slang word.
Cool. All right.
So that's our world building section. Now we get to talk about the individual characters,
and we really dive far more deeply into Sai these 2 chapters than we did the previous one.
Yeah, we certainly see him more in his element.
For sure. And yeah, so you wanted to talk about You called out, as intractable as he gets, his behavior differs from month to month.
Yeah, I just kind of noted that they mentioned, it was just a passing mention. I just thought it was interesting, like they briefly mentioned that his behavior seems to be different from month to month. And last episode we were kind of talking about how a wyvern kind of has this variable meaning, and maybe Sai is meant to be more of like a variable, like, you know, he can be whatever they sort of need him to be at any given time. So I kind of noticed that brief mention of him having different behavior over time, and thought, I wonder if that kind of is corroboration of my earlier theory.
No, that's very interesting. And like, oh yeah, I mean, it's a good connection to the name that we talked about. Yeah, last episode.
Also, it kind of implies that, you know, the characterization that we get of Sylvester in this chapter, in the last couple chapters, that a lot of that could just be like Sylvester today. And, you know, maybe when we get a bit more of the story a couple months from now, it'll be completely different and we won't recognize him at all. Or it'll be interesting to see what parts of it are the same and what parts of it are different.
So in that vein, do you think this story or this perception of Sai that we see is an affectation or a mask that he's putting on? Or do you think it's just his personality does go through these dramatic changes over short periods of time?
I think both and neither. I think that like what we see of Sai is a little bit him putting on a front and being like, look at me, I'm so smart and whatever. And also just like him being himself. But I feel like given this hint that his behavior might differ from month to month, I'm just kind of interested, like in a few chapters, maybe it'll be a few months later and maybe he'll have a different outlook underneath. Maybe he'll have a different front that he's putting up, or maybe not. I don't know. But I just think that kind of an interesting thought.
No, for sure. And I wonder how much of that is because he's in this, in theory, enemy territory. You know, he's in the academy, and it's an academy. I think it's Lacey that says it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we see that he does not want Lacey to get him.
Yes.
Yeah. I also wanted to kind of note that we do see Sai liking very much, again, these sort of convoluted, complicated plans that take a lot to come into fruition.
He likes his Rube Goldberg machines.
Exactly, you know. And then we also see that everything that he does, or almost everything that he does, either he's able to improvise really quick with it, or it all has a bunch of different purposes. You know, nothing that he does happens for just one reason.
Mm-hmm.
Which is,
I also kind of got the impression that, like, sometimes, like, there were a few places in his plan where he was like, oh, that happened. That's not good. And it's just like, you kind of get the impression that he's doing this all kind of by the seat of his pants.
And it just, he's smart enough that it works out.
He's smart enough that it mostly works out, but he also kind of thinks he's smarter than he actually is.
Oh, 100%. I mean, his whole conversation with Lacey is basically that, I think.
Okay.
Do you disagree?
Why don't we talk about this this conversation with Lacey? Because I think that is important insight into his outlook and his attitudes.
So we're both.
He really is awful to Lacey.
Oh, 100%. He's horrible. We're talking about that speech where he said, where he's talking about the gun and you give someone a gun, you threaten them, you're going to kill them unless they kill someone. And he says, maybe you're like the second man, maybe you're like the third, but you definitely don't have a gun to your head. If you're being nice to me, it's for your benefit, not mine. And that is a very unfair statement. We have explicitly seen multiple times already how anybody who's not at the top is very much a victim of the system.
Mm-hmm.
And just because Sai, can't see the gun to her head, it does not mean that she's just not just as trapped as, say, Lillian or the Snake Charmer or...
Speaking of Lillian, Lillian is just as, if his problem with Lacey is that she's cooperating with the Academy in working on the Lambsbridge project.
Yeah.
Like Lillian is
Just as much.
absolutely just as much of a problem as Lacey is, but he is nice to Lillian, or as nice as a kid is who likes to tease the people that they are fond of.
Yeah.
But he's cruel to Lacey.
Oh, I think part of it is also because he sees Lacey as someone who has power over him, whereas he sees Lillian as a peer. Like Lacey,
Maybe.
yeah, I don't necessarily know how to articulate what I'm trying to say here about Sai's interaction with Lacey, but yeah, like it's cruel cruel in ways that are unfair,
Mm-hmm.
in a way that we haven't seen Sai be in other situations.
Like the only things that we can really say for sure, I think, are that he resents her.
Yeah.
And I think he mentions part of it is because
She pities him.
Because she pities him. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I guess he's like, this lady, she pities him, so she thinks that he's kind of beneath her, and maybe he can tell that she thinks of him as like a sort of lesser creature.
An experiment.
So that's why he believes that her attitude toward her attempts to sort of be friendly with him is
disingenuous.
But like, he makes it out like, don't talk to me like we're friends. I'm your job. Like,
it's Lillian's job too.
Well, yes, but also like, even if that's true, like it's still better for her to try and like have this sort of rapport.
Okay.
Yeah, to try and have this sort of rapport. Like if you have somebody with like a client, like the client is your job, but you still want to have a good relationship with your clients.
Right.
Or like, in a case like this where, maybe you have like your business relationship is with one person, but your responsibilities are with a different person. Like, they're not technically your client. I don't know what the word for that is, but like you still want to have this good relationship and have this sort of like friendly interaction with them. That's normal. That's what people are supposed to do. That's what people expect and what people like. And Sai is like, you're doing this exact normal thing and therefore you're a bad person. And it's like, I'm pretty sure Sai knows better than that, but I feel like he's using it just kind of as an excuse because he doesn't like Lacey.
I can see that, but I feel like it's a circular thing for Sai. He doesn't like Lacey because she's this person, so he's going to treat her shittily and make her, act in ways that makes him dislike her.
Yeah, that's probably a part of it as well. But I just think that this is such a, like, most of the time when we see Sylvester, I mean, we see Sylvester in this whole time because we're in his head. But most of the time, he's either being clever and doing some plot, or he's being silly and having a little laugh at whatever's going on.
Yeah, that's true.
But then all of a sudden we get this, and it's just like, this is him when he has an enemy. When he has an enemy, but also when he is being like sort of, not so much when he has an enemy, but when he is the enemy.
Well, I guess I can sort of see a parallels. It's not a direct parallel, but a sort of similar way of interaction with the snake charmer. It's less about breaking the snake charmer down as it is Lacey, but it's still, a psychological attack.
Well, yeah. But like with the snake charmer, and again with Ed, he has these psychological attacks, but it's very just sort of like they are a tool and he is just going to manipulate them, whatever.
Whereas this is personal.
This is personal. This is very much like, Sylvester has a very unreasonable dislike for this woman.
Yeah.
And is just playing with her cruelly because he can.
And it's interesting because we don't see him have this same kind of relationship with Hale, when by all accounts he should even more, because Hale has, so much more power over him.
Yeah, and he says that he respects Hale and doesn't respect Lacey, which may or may not be true.
Yeah.
But but you're right. He does not have this problem with Hale, despite being in a similar situation with him.
Yeah, well, yeah, arguably even greater power dynamic, power
Definitely,
differentials. Yeah. Speaking about Hale, unless you want to say something more about Lacey.
Nope.
Speaking about Hale, I do want to say it's a little concerning that Sai talks about his brain hurting, and we know that Hale is a brain person. I don't know where that's going, but I am willing to put my hand to fire that is related.
Yes, I think that's definitely related. We mentioned, or we haven't mentioned it yet, but you have it in your notes for a bit further down that there's a mention of an appointment.
Yeah.
As being this important thing that we will mention but not explain.
Yeah.
And I think it's pretty safe to say that Sai having an appointment with the brain doctor and then having a major headache, like I think we can put the pieces
together. Yeah. Very much. Yeah, so yeah, we don't have any real information yet besides learning that Sai is an experiment and in last chapter, and that he had an appointment with the brain person this chapter. I also thought it was
that he's like always like intolerable following an appointment,
which presumably is trying to work off the headache, because we get he mentions that the pain in my head was going away by the moment that he has like something to distract him. Yes. And I don't know if that's like, I can see that being just something to think about is distracting him for the pain, or I can also see it, part of his experiment, he needs to be thinking and actively processing stuff for the brain to it's building new connective tissues or new neurons, new connections. I don't know. I'm just guessing here, obviously.
I just kind of assumed that it was like the metaphorical, distracting thing that you would see from any other person. But in this case, you're right. It could very much be quite literal.
Yeah.
And I like that a lot.
Yeah. And then we do get a bit more about the other Lambsbridge orphans, mostly Helen and Gordon.
No. We get a little bit more of what we saw already, particularly with regards to Helen and Gordon.
Sure, yes.
Because like Gordon, we established in previous chapters that he is like, strong and handsome and good. And then we see like in this case, it's like, oh yes, I've been here a week. So obviously I was able to become the best at everything.
And everybody loves me.
Yes. And then Helen, we had already established
is creepy.
As like, able to behave perfectly in a situation with Miss Thetford. And then here again, we see like, he gives her some instructions like, act like this, and then she does it like flawlessly. So we see a lot of examples of just kind of like things that we established, and we see more of that and like kind of expanding our understanding of what that means and how far that goes. But in terms of other lambs that we learn more of and we see more of, I think the most important one is Jamie.
Really? As I didn't like, we see Sai's relationship with Jamie far more in this chapter, but I didn't think we got all that much from Jamie himself. So
I think the real reason is that Jamie is the one we saw the least of in the previous chapters. Like, we got to see Gordon and Helen do stuff, but Jamie was just kind of outside, and we didn't really interact with him a lot. Whereas here we get some information about like, oh, Jamie would know the background information about such and such a situation, or, oh, I wouldn't remember this, but Jamie would, and I'll have to describe it to them and then he'll remember. And then you also have like Jamie and Sai having this like friendly shoving match, and you get to see that they're like actually really good buddies. And I feel like we see a lot more of the kind of person Jamie is in these two chapters than we did before.
Yeah, that makes sense. And where Jamie falls into the dynamics of the group also. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I also I noted I didn't write it down in my notes, but I noticed when we were writing, or when I was reading, that Sai, I think it's Sai, says that, oh, I'll be able to describe these faces that I saw for half a second, and Jamie will be able to put together who that is.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I guess, yeah, you're right. We do learn far more about Jamie and I guess Jamie's purpose as a group or in the group here.
What is point in the yeah.
Yeah. And I go ahead.
Right.
Yeah. No, go ahead. I think we're going in the same place.
Yes.
So go ahead.
So on the subject of finding a place in the group, we find the very interesting and possibly important piece of information that Hale's intention was there to be 6 members of the Lambsbridge gang, but only 4 of them were viable.
Yeah, which is, kind of an ominous statement because, that maybe could mean that whatever the embryo didn't take or something, that the right from the beginning it didn't work. But it also could very well mean that the experiments weren't exactly what Hale was looking for, so they were disposed of or gotten rid of.
And that is also ominous because even though it's never brought up in these chapters, these projects have expiration dates.
Yeah, exactly. And, though, from what we've seen of Hale, he doesn't seem like the type to just throw away. He seems more like the type of person, just I guess his interactions with Lillian made me think of this, but it seems like he's more the kind of person to try to adapt. Maybe he's just, making do with a low budget and not losing investments, but he would try to adapt to different things as they come up.
Mm-hmm.
So is there anything else you wanted to say about this 4 out of 6 thing?
I wonder if Lillian is intended to directly replace one of the 2 non-viable members of the group.
And if so, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but just as a thought there, and if so, how recently were these 2 lost? Anyway, carry on.
She's very new to the group.
Exactly.
Yeah. So either that or she's, just kind of an extra supplement, change of plan sort of thing. I suppose it doesn't matter which it is, but kind of interesting if she's filling in for a project that was already intended. And if so, what is it that makes her
qualified?
What is it about her that makes her such a good match for a place that was intended to be filled by someone specifically designed to be better than your average human?
Yeah, because we've seen her be a little panicky, but still able to do stuff under pressure. But nothing that stands out yet, I think.
Yeah, like we know that she's extremely smart and like good at.
Yeah,
she's successful in her studies, presumably anyway.
I mean, enough to be in the academy, even if she has to do this to pay for it.
Yes. So, but whether or not she's like just a really good student or like crazy good.
Yeah, exceptional on some level.
Yeah, we haven't really seen yet.
Yeah, and we have not gotten enough of her yet to really get an idea of that yet, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I also wanted to note that I got a feeling that the orphans had much better chemistry in this chapter than in the previous 2. They seem to get along more and care for each other a little more than the previous one. I don't know if that's just because in the last one they were just coming off of a stressful combat, let's say, whereas here they've been not resting because they're being still attacked and poisoned and whatnot. But yeah, it's a different kind of situation. Okay.
I didn't really see much of a difference in that way, but you could be right.
Yeah, I don't know if I could point to any specific reasons, just a vibe,
Mm-hmm.
And I also wanted to note that we get a bit of a confirmation that Helen was designed to be kind of an infiltration unit. Like I think Sai and Jamie say she was designed for this.
Yeah.
But
I
yeah,
like Helen. She's
me
terrifying.
Too. She's absolutely. I mean, I like that even Sai, who knows her very well and in theory likes her, described as being in a tiger enclosure when she gets close to him. But he also does note that she gets what he's going for immediately and plays along immediately.
Yep. They're a good team.
Yeah, very clearly. But yeah, I definitely still get that animated statue learning how to be a human vibe.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Did you have anything else to say about the Lambsbridge project people?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Did you?
No. So we had a couple other people that we just kind of thought were worth bringing up. I wanted to bring up the director of Mafmont just because, like, the way she's described, businesslike in a pink jacket and curly hair, and I'm like, this lady looks like Dolores Umbridge from Harry Potter.
Yeah.
And, you know, I don't know if personality-wise there's a match in any way, but, like, aesthetically, that's totally what we're going for, right?
She has animated kitten plates hanging on her wall in her office. Absolutely.
Yes. And I just thought it was funny, like, Cy thinking, this lady just lied to me twice in one sentence. I like her.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's like, Cy would like Umbridge too, probably. But I thought that was really funny.
I don't know if Cy would, just because Umbridge has this, like, obsequious fakeness that Cy would probably get very frustrated with.
Maybe.
But yeah, I get where you're going with that very much.
Mm-hmm. And the other character that I wanted to bring up was Ed. Not because there's anything, not that there's anything particularly interesting about Ed that I could think of, but he's so important to this chapter that we kind of have to acknowledge him.
Speaking of Harry Potter, he's our Draco Malfoy right now. He's this slimy, public school in the British sense archetype. Very much has this, rich boys will be boys, never face any kind of consequences type of attitude.
Mm-hmm. I feel like Ed is very two-dimensional, but I kind of think that that's specifically because Cy sees him as two-dimensional.
Oh, absolutely. I'm sure he is a very well-rounded character, but Cy doesn't care enough to.
Nope.
No, know who he is. Yeah, very much.
Yeah, poor Ed. I wonder if we'll see more of him or if he's fulfilled his purpose.
I don't. I mean,
it'd be funny if he joined the Lambs as like a sixth kid.
Yeah, the we have Lillian, who's the healer, and Ed, who replaces the smarmy jerk of the group.
Oh no, that means Cy is out.
Yep. Yeah. All right. So yeah, do you have anything more to say about Ed? Like, as you said, Cy doesn't think about him very much, so I guess we don't need to think about him all that much.
Yep. I've thought about him as much as I care to. Let's move on to our discussion question.
So we had asked last 2 episodes for people to tell us what they wanted to hear and see and get out of this podcast. Mm-hmm. So we covered most of the answers that we got in our first episode last week or 2 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
Last time, yes. But Grilled Clam answered in the most recent one, and Grilled Clam says that don't mean to gender, they would like to hear more of our opinions on the characters, like who's our current favorite. When they read it, they like to figure out who the weakest link in each scenario they're in is, and how and who would replace that and fill in, which is interesting because we're just talking about how this group that was built to be a group is missing 2 members. Uh-huh. So I thought that was a very interesting question just in relation to what we're talking about in this chapter.
Well, we saw that when the Lambsbridge gang was without Sylvester, that they were really struggling.
And I can see that also being the case were they to go into the field without Gordon to make friends or without Jamie to know everything. Uh-huh. They would struggle in different ways, but they would struggle.
Yeah, I guess they must have been struggling for a while before Lillian showed up as well.
Yeah, every time Cy got hurt by losing a fight.
Which is, 2 for 2 for the missions we've been on so far.
Exactly. Yeah. So
who is your current favorite?
I don't know that I can answer that yet. I mean, it's easy to say Cy just because Cy is the character that we have gotten to know. If it's not Cy, it's probably Helen just because of how unnerving she is. What about you?
Yeah, I think I'd agree. Cy is the favorite just because he's the one that we know best. I feel like aside from Cy, I would say Lillian.
Okay, that's
Lillian just
interesting.
seems like a fun character. We haven't seen much of her yet, but
As the
I don't know.
outsider,
Maybe it's just because she's the most normal.
she's the straight man to the group.
Yeah. I don't know. I like how she's just like, I'm way out of my depth. Let's do this.
That's fair. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see these characters grow and develop, and I am sure all survive to the end.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a new discussion question for this coming 2 weeks.
Yes. So as we hinted at in our last episode, tell us what questing party roles you would give to each of the Lambsbridge orphans.
And as a bonus, where do the missing 2 projects fit into that dynamic?
Yes. So questing party roles for each of the 4 Lambsbridge orphans and each of the 2 missing ones that we don't know about.
And if you want to have fun with it, give them some appropriate mythical project name.
Okay, see, now I'm imagining these 2 missing orphans as the 2 blue wizards from Lord of the Rings.
Sure. They went off to the east, and they're at a different academy in a farm upstate.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's it for our second real episode. Thank you for joining us on our dive into Twig, which you can read along with us at twigserial.wordpress.com. Also, please go to Wildbow's Patreon, even if you're not following along with us, and support him at patreon.com/wildbow. It's how he can take the time to produce all of these great stories and settings. Please also leave your answer to our discussion question in our Reddit thread or on our Discord thread.
Yeah, so you can reach us at totwigpodcast@gmail.com or at totwigpodcast on Twitter, as long as Twitter continues to run.
Are we going to create a, what is it? What's the replacement? Mastodon? Is that the replacement?
I've heard of Mastodon. Does anyone use Mastodon? If you use Mastodon and want us to be on there, let us know and we'll consider it. Yeah, we'll have our thread in r/parahumans. And next episode we'll be covering Taking Root 1.5 and 1.6.
You can also now join us in our Discord thread, which is being hosted very kindly on the Doof Network server, which you can find at doofmedia.com/Discord. There you can also find any number of their interesting podcasts. So whether it be Wildbow related, there's Pale Reflections and Pale in Comparison, as well as podcasts on a number of other subjects. You know, there's a book club and whatnot. So we invite you to come along and talk to us there. As for a biofact, which is not really a biofact this week, the word, it's sort of bio, but it's more etymology, which is fun.
Ooh, fun.
The word blood is, from what I could research, derived from the Proto-Indo-European root blo. I don't know how to pronounce that as an Proto-Indo-European would have, which means that which bursts out. This connection, or this root, is also related to bloma, or flower, which, you know, bloom and blossom outwards. And obviously I chose this fact because of the vines that we see going throughout of this, blood red veins. So bringing the roots back together to that original Proto-Indo-European root.
You're taking the roots.
Exactly.
I don't think that counts as a plant pun either.
Going to the root of it? I think it counts well enough.
Okay. There you go, steel hibiscus.
Hope you're happy.
All right. So that's all we've got today.
Right,
we will
see
be back in a couple weeks.
See you shortly.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.